Avete, sorors, and fraters. My name is Ph.D. Soror P.O.I.O., Imperatrix of the Temple of Thoth Hermes in Denver, Colorado. I'd like to welcome you today to the first in our Neophyte series. Today will be an introductory lecture on some important topics to get you started in your magical lifestyle, as well as some important points on temple etiquette when you go to visit a temple. And also we will discuss the importance of the vows and what they mean in each of our lives. Let's get started. So first you will notice behind me that I have here the banner of the East and the banner of the West. Now normally in the temple, the banner of the East will be in the eastern quarter of the temple, and the banner of the West, of course, will be in the western quarter of the temple. This is a very important arrangement. One of the things that you'll notice is that the background of the banner of the East is in white. The background of the banner of the West is in black. One of the reasons for this is because it signifies that the presence of God exists within the multitude of fluctuations between light and darkness. You'll also notice here that on the banner of the West, we have the white triangle, which represents the supernals. This shows the presence of God even in the darkest of nights. Another important thing that you'll notice about the banners is that on each of them, there exists a golden cross. So we have a large golden cross here on the banner of the East, and we have a smaller, not as noticeable golden cross here on the West. So this also is another signifier of the light of the divine, which exists both in the fluctuations of light and in darkness, always present within us, no matter what point in our spiritual development we are. When we enter the temple, the first thing that we will be asked, if it's for an initiation, by the sentinel, also known as the Pholux, is, "What does thou seek?" And the answer to that is, "I seek to learn that I may serve." This is your first lesson about temple etiquette. After that, you will be asked the password for that 6-month period. I'd like to just take a moment to discuss the conversation that occurs between the initiate and the Pholux at the gate of the West when entering the temple. Oftentimes, it's something that's just kind of brushed aside, and people don't really think about it or contemplate it, but it's actually very important because it points out something that exists within our spiritual practice and that we should implement in our spiritual practice every single day, and that is supplication unto the divine. It's an act of humility. So the first thing we do before we even enter the temple is that we act with humility towards what we are going to learn and experience within that particular space. I seek to learn that I may serve. Now, servitude comes in a variety of different ways, and many of you won't begin really serving the order, for at least a few grades. It's likely that some of you, if you are part of a physical temple, may partake in being engaged in an officer role or maybe even doing some assistant work. It's important to note that even as a neophyte, you can serve as an officer in the position of Pholux or Sentinel, but as a zealotor, you can serve in the position of Stolaces or Didojos. As a Theorkis, you can serve as the Carix, also known as the Caricana in the feminine. And then as a Practicus, you can serve as the Hegemon, and Philosophus, you can serve as the Hieris or Hierea. So these are some of the ways that you can serve. But in order to serve in the temple in whatever way that you may choose at some point as you progress through the grades, the first thing that we must do is we must learn. And you state that you want to learn so that you may serve. And that may be in the temple or that may be in other areas of your life. That may be in assisting somebody who is in need, or helping out a family member or another frater or soror in the order. The point is that we want to use our knowledge, our magical knowledge, especially as we ascend through the ranks, to learn how to be a better servant unto the divine. And in being a servant, what we do is we empty ourselves out to become a most beautiful vessel for the divine light. So now that we have entered the temple first in humility and supplication, we walk around the temple to the banner of the east. Now, again, I want to make clear that the setup I have behind me is not the setup we will have in the temple. In fact, I'm going to move the banner of the west just out of the way so we don't confuse ourselves. Okay. When you enter the temple, you will walk around the temple clockwise, and you will salute either to the very honored Hierophantria or Hierophant or to the banner of the east, depending on the situation. So technically, in the traditional setup, you will enter through the gateway of the west after having the conversation with the Sentinel of Thorax. You will walk clockwise around the temple. So this means you will go around the central altar, and you will also go around the pillars. One thing to remember is that you never want to walk through the pillars, and we will discuss that at a later date. But you will walk all the way around the temple, and if the very honored Hierophantria or Hierophant is sitting on the throne, then you will give the sign of the enter and the sign of silence to them as a representative of the light. I say that because I want you to understand that when you enter the temple and you salute the dais officer who's sitting on the throne of the Hierophant, that you are not saluting them personally, outside of saying potentially the divine light in me sees the divine light in you, but that you are saluting the representation of that person as the divine light and the expounder of the mysteries within the temple. So really what you're doing is you're saluting the highest aspect of God, which is represented in that temple through the Hierophant for that initiation. If the very honored Hierophantry or Hierophant is not on the throne, then you will salute the banner of the east. And I will currently perform this salute to the banner. Sorry, I apologize for that. So the salute to the banner of the east or the very honored Hierophant or Hierophantria is thus. We raise our hands up to what would be the Keter sphere above our head. As you begin practicing the middle pillar, you will recall that the Keter sphere is a bright scintillating white light that we imagine above our head to represent the Keter sphere on the tree of life. So we're actually pulling that divine light down. And we pull it down to about eye level, and we project it out, bowing our head down as we do so, and gazing towards the banner of the east. As we withdraw, we place our left finger upon our lips, thus, and we stomp with our left foot. So I'll perform this again. Hands up to the Keter sphere, down to the eye level. As we project outward, we step forward with the left foot and bring the head down, gaze towards the banner of the east or towards the very honored Hierophant or Hierophantria. Then we come back, stomp, and make the sign of silence. Now, I'd just like to briefly discuss this particular movement. One of the things that you will note is that we bring our head down. Now, I want you to see what happens when I bring my head down as if I'm going to salute. as if I'm going to salute. Here. Recall from your Hebrew lesson the letters of Resh and Kof. Resh means front of the head, whereas Kof means back of the head. Resh represents the outward consciousness, that consciousness that we are used to experiencing every day, the consciousness that you currently are in. It's an outward thinking consciousness. It's one that is active, that is receiving messages and processing them, all within this frontal lobe portion of the head. Kof, however, represents back of the head, and back of the head here in this case represents the subconscious. So it's very interesting to notice that as we make the sign of the enterer, that we align the resh and the kof together. We're also happening to be aligning our crown chakra and also the third eye energy center as well. So all of these centers are being aligned, and all of these are communication centers of some degree, right? The crown chakra is our communication center with the divine, whereas our third eye is our communication center that processes that divine light down through the three supernals and into our waking consciousness and into our subconsciousness. So what essentially we're doing here is we're invoking an energetic movement within our sphere of sensation, again here, similar to when we entered the temple of supplication unto the higher, unto the divine. Okay? So one of the lessons that we're learning here very early on is that in order for us to progress on our spiritual path and to progress as magicians, we offer ourselves and give ourselves over to the divine in order to guide us so that we may become more than what we currently are. And that begins with acts of humility. So I want to just reaffirm that when I talk about supplication and when I talk about humility, I'm not talking about self-degradation. I'm talking about the idea that we recognize that we are a small part of a much greater whole. So I'll take you to the example in the Neophyte initiation when the Highress is giving his address to the brand new Neophytes, and he discusses how even the ends of his robe as fire go out into the universe. One of the ways that I like to think about our relationship with the divine is as if we were a candle flame. So we have a flame, the fire of the Lord of the universe, and let's say somebody took a candle and lit that candle, and now we have a separate light, we have a separate fire, and yet that fire is still from the source of the divine. It's the same fire, but it has an individual consciousness. And it's when we reunite those two fires together perceptually, within our spiritual consciousness, that we begin to really understand the power that we have inside. So our true power as magicians does not come from ourselves and what we try to force out of ourselves as we develop. Our true power as magicians comes from the light of the divine. There's a beautiful prayer. It's a prayer of Enoch, one of our great patriarchs of our order and our system. And it says, "O Lord, I call upon thee, and in thee I become mighty, and thou shalt light me, and I will become a seer." I really love that because it just really illustrates the idea that only through the Lord of the universe do we truly become mighty. And so these little acts of supplication that we do in terms of the temple etiquette start highlighting that, our real place is in the bosom of the divine, is to understand that we will learn and grow exponentially when we give ourselves over to being enlightened by the divine light. Here represented by the banner of the East. Okay, so we're going to move on now to just a couple other things. One of the things that you'll want to do in your personal space is you'll probably want to have a altar. Here we can see my altar. And we'll want to have some candles and other accoutrement to enhance our experience. So as you can see here from my personal altar, what I have is I have the 4 elements represented on it. I have a rose here. You can have a fresh rose, anything that represents the element of air. You can have a fan on there or a feather if you like. I like to use a rose because that's what we use in our initiations. And this one's a special rose for me, actually. I keep a dried rose on here because this came from a special event where I had a special spiritual experience. So I like to keep myself reminded of that. I have a censer here to represent fire. And of course, then I can burn some incense that may be appropriate to the particular working that I'm involved in. I have this lovely little chalice here that I keep on the altar again. You can utilize other implements to represent the 4 elements. In place of a chalice for a while, I actually had a sand dollar, which represents the divine feminine in water. And I've always loved the mythology around the sand dollar, so I had that for a while, but I moved back to having a chalice recently. Here I have a paten of bread and some salt. Within this, I picked up this little thing at the thrift store and I cleaned it up, and it's been wonderful. As you can see here, I also have 2 candles representing the pillars of Hermes and Solomon. This one is a black candle and it has the symbolism on it from the Per and Heru, the Book of the Dead. And then I also have a corresponding white color candle. You can actually find these on Etsy. And I'll see if I can find a link and also post it to the Facebook page. But another thing you can do is just get a black candle and a white candle and put that on there. I think in terms of the Golden Dawn altar, this is really what you should have minimum. A representation of the 4 elements, and then something to represent the pillars of Hermes and Solomon. Now, that being said, I said minimum because I have always promoted the idea of making your altar intimate and special to you, having some symbolism around it that is meaningful to you, because when you, as the Hierophant says, by names and images are all powers awakened and reawakened. And I think it's important that when you walk into your temple space, that what you look at and what you see and experience there is automatically going to elevate you. So if you have something special that you want to keep around, maybe a picture of your patron that you like to work with. My patron, for example, is Thoth. This is something that may develop for you later on, or maybe you have a special connection with the Holy Mother. So you put a picture or something to symbolize the Holy Mother there. Recall that the Golden Dawn is accepting of all religions and spiritual paths that reflect the light of and love of the divine. So it doesn't matter what your spiritual path is or what your religious affiliation is. If you have something from that you want to incorporate into your altar, you should feel welcome to do that. One of the things that I like to do is I have this guardian angel candle. You can find these for $1 usually at the grocery store like Walmart, or here in Colorado we have King Supers. It's $1, and I love it because to me the guardian angel here represents the higher genius, which is what we seek to unify with after our knowledge and conversation. So I always have this guardian angel candle on my altar. I'm going to grab a couple other things from the actual altar area to show you some other things that I like to put around usually. So here's just a couple other little examples of things that I have around my altar. One thing is a picture of myself and my little brother. My little brother passed away when he was quite young, and I keep this on my altar so I can think about him. And then here's the sand dollar I was talking about earlier. There's some stories about how this relates to the divine feminine energy, the Holy Mother. So I keep that around my altar as well. And then I also have this beautiful icon that I like to keep around. So, after having the required constituents on the altar, you should feel free to kind of spruce up that area. I wouldn't suggest going overboard with it. You want to keep things simple in your consciousness, but you're absolutely welcome to make things a little bit more intimate for yourself. Now, that being said, I'd like to discuss with you the lighting of the candles in the temple. Okay, so upon entering your temple space or the physical temple space, if you're visiting a temple or you're lucky enough to have a physical temple in your area, um, in review, the first thing you will do upon entering the temple is you will make your grade sign. Now, specifically in this lecture, we've talked about the grade sign of the neophyte. However, if you are in a higher grade and there are no lower grade members present, you will make your grade sign to the banner of the east. So that's upon entering the temple or entering your own temple space in your home. So you will make your grade sign to the banner of the east. So let's say you go to a temple and you're having a Theoricus class. Everybody entering the temple will make the grade sign of the Theoricus rather than the grade sign of the neophyte. Okay, and you will do this at home as well. So first we make the grade signs upon entering our temple space. Now we want to prep the temple. And one of the first things we'll do is we'll light the candles. Now, when you're in the temple, if you have side altars, you will light the candles starting from the east and going clockwise around the temple back to the east or to the central altar. So if I were in our temple space currently, I would start in the east, I would go to the west, I would go to the south, I would go to the north, and then I would go to the central altar and I would light the candles. And then subsequently at the end, we would go backwards, starting from the central altar all the way to the east. And the lighting of the candles in this order represents the rise of the sun of light and life, and then the ensuing darkness, but not the darkness of the night, just the fading of the light, as in the natural proportions of the rising and setting of the sun in this particular instance. Now here, for my own personal altar, the way that I will light my candles is I will first light the candle associated with the white pillar, and then I will light the candle associated with the black pillar, and then I will light my Holy Guardian Angel candle, because I don't normally include side altars in the house for lack of space reasons. At that point, then, I will usually light my incense. Okay, and now you'll notice here that I have this little candle. I just, to be quick, use this big lighter here, but I get these special candles from a local church, usually during the Easter period. They're made of beeswax and they're made by monks, and you get to have one during this special Easter service. And I hate to let it go to waste, so I usually use it throughout the year. I light this candle, and then I light the other ones. So also just another example of how you can make your practice personal to you and more meaningful to you. Okay, so that covers our temple etiquette portion. And this is the first time using YouTube, so I apologize, I can't swivel and move this around, and then I'm adjusting it a little bit, but I am honored and just so happy that I even get to teach this class to you. So thank you for watching it. We will now go over the vows and the importance of the vows. So the first thing that I'd like to make clear about the vows, and something that should be understood before you are initiated, but oftentimes I think is something that falls through the cracks, is that you are not making your vows to the order per se, or to any person within the order. The vows that you say during your neophyte initiation are vows that are being said between you and your higher genius. And this is what makes them so important. And this is why they get pretty serious at the end. And we're going to talk about some of the more controversial aspects of the vows in order to bring a little bit more understanding to them. So what we'll do is I'm just going to read through the vows, and I will stop periodically to discuss the importance of certain aspects of the vows. So it begins, I, fill in your name, your earthly mundane name, in the presence of the Lord of the universe and in the presence of the higher self, the divine guardians of the order, and this assembly in the hall of the neophyte of the Fellowship of the Golden Dawn, or the Order of the Golden Dawn Universum, or whatever order you particularly come from. Here we'll stop, okay? First, it says right off the bat, in the presence of the Lord of the universe. And you'll notice that as I say Lord of the universe, one of the things I do is I bow my head. This is also a part of our particular tradition in terms of temple etiquette. When the Hierophant or Hierophantria or someone in the temple says Lord of the universe in respect, we humbly bow our heads. Okay? First, we're saying in the presence of the Lord of the universe. One fundamental rule in terms of magical formula is that we always invoke from the highest down. So you'll notice when you do your middle pillar exercise, for example, we start with the Keter sphere and we work our way down the middle pillar. When we call forth divine names and certain rituals that you'll partake in later on in your practice, you'll notice that we go down what's called a hierarchy, starting with the highest divine name, going to the archangel, going to the angel, etc., 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 down the hierarchy. Here we are following magical formula. The first thing we're doing is saying in the presence of the Lord of the universe, the highest, in the presence of my higher self. That's the second part. That's the part of us here in this formula. It's connecting us to the divine. The divine guardians of this order. Now we're connecting the higher self to, or the Lord of the universe to our higher self, now to the guardians of this order. So see how we're anchoring ourselves down to the order. And this assembly in the hall of the neophyte, that means all of your soon-to-be brothers and sisters and all of the members of the order in this order. So we have just gone down a hierarchy, and what we have done is we have created an anchoring through the hierarchy down into the hall of the neophyte. So there's now an energetic anchor between the Lord of the universe, yourself, and the hall of the neophyte, for which you are to take your vows now. Okay? So we move on. Do of my own free will, hereon and hereby most solemnly promise to keep secret this order, the names of its members, and any and all proceedings that take place at its meetings from every person in the world who has not been initiated into it, nor will I discuss order proceedings with any member who is not the current password, who has resigned, been expelled, or in general fallen away from order attendance and participation of order studies. First, I'd like to point out that it says, do of my own free will. Okay, this is very important because the first gift that the Lord of the universe ever gave us was the gift of free will. And it's important to understand this because our free will comes into play in our spiritual development. We have talked a great deal during this lecture about the idea of humility and supplication. That humility and supplication has to come from our choice. It cannot be forced upon us. We may know intellectually that we need to do it, but if we don't make the choice to do it, then we do not play an interactive role with the divine in our lives. So many times in our spiritual development from this point forward, we will be given lessons. And it will be our choice whether we want to engage in those lessons or not, and to lengthen out that process of spiritual alchemy or not. Some people, they just jump in head first. Other people dip their toes in the water and they want to feel it out. It will always be your choice how quickly you progress, whether you want to open yourself up to those energies or whether you want to resist that transformation in your life. And I don't say that to be negative, I say that to be positive. I was told one time during a communion recently that the union of us with the divine is the greatest love story that has ever existed. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how many times you have fallen in love in life, right? You see someone and you are taken aback by their magnificence. You walk around and your heart aches for them. Maybe you can't eat, maybe you can't sleep. You just feel this thing in your gut, and you get to know them, and it's magnificent and it's beautiful. And I want you to think about how that made you feel. Now, I want you to understand that that is a small reflection of the love that you can have with the divine in your life, because God is love. The nature of existence that underlies everything is the power of love. But we cannot engage in this love story if we did not have free will, right? It's not a true love between you and another party if you don't have the choice to love that person, the choice to engage in that relationship, the choice to grow in that relationship with that other party. So it's very important to understand that when we make this pledge to our higher self and to the Lord of the universe, we're doing it of our own free will. And we're saying, you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready for the next step. I'm ready to put aside childish things and to experience the love of my life, to experience this growth and this transition in my life and to move forward. And yes, I understand that it may be difficult at times, but I also understand that if I willingly commit myself to that process, that the end result is going to be a true unification with the light and love of the Lord of the universe. And there's nothing more beautiful than that. So following this now is a statement about keeping things associated with this order secret. Now, why is this important? Historically, this was important because magicians had to often deal with oppression from other groups. Even now today, we sometimes have to consider the fact that we may need to make social media um, uh, private from, between our order associations and our mundane friends and family, because there's been instances where mundane friends and family or work colleagues have seen things and thought, well, that's a little weird. And that doesn't have anything to do with us, that has to do with them, right? But we have to deal sometimes with the negative consequences of that. And that was even more so historically, especially in the 1800s. So there was a real physical need for people to take vows when the original order was around, just due to protective purposes. However, on a more spiritual level, this represents the concept of the Hermetic seal. Now, the Hermetic seal has to do with a series of a certain aspect of study in the Golden Dawn called alchemy. And some of you may be familiar with alchemy. Maybe you studied alchemy before you came to the order. But essentially, alchemy is a process of spiritual purification that turns the lower self, which is associated with the element of, or with the, which is associated with metal lead, into gold, which is associated, or or into the higher self, which is associated with gold. Okay, and maybe many of you who've gone to college and taken some chemistry classes may have had, as part of the introduction, that a lot of modern chemistry came from the practice of alchemy. And they discuss alchemy as this kind of way in which people would try to get money out of, their solicitors in order to, become rich or something, and they would lie to them. They were called puffers, and they would lie to them and say, well, I can turn lead into gold. But the truth is that real alchemists were utilizing these physical practices of alchemy as a way to enhance their consciousness and help them to understand the transition between how we transform the lower self to the higher self. So you'll actually learn some physical alchemy and the importance of that in a higher grade. However, back to the topic at hand, when undergoing an alchemical process, it's important to institute what's called the Hermetic seal. And what that means is that you take a container, which they call the alembic, and you add certain constituents in it that are going to help to create that process of transformation. But after you do that, then you seal it. And you seal it so that you don't let other outside forces into it. And the reason that I bring that up in terms of the vows is because all of us who are in the order are undergoing different alchemical processes at the same time. And that's individual alchemy. And if you are connected closely with another frat or a soror or a temple, you may be undergoing group alchemy alongside of that. And alchemy is a beautiful process of transformation, but it causes sometimes a lot of shifting and sifting and challenging experiences. So one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to add in outside forces into essentially the recipe that's cooking right there. We don't want to go to our best friend and tell them about the spiritual practices that we're doing, because they won't be living ultimately in a different paradigm than you are, most likely, unless they're part of the order and they understand the precepts of the order. And so they may start filling your head with stuff. You need to give yourself time to have your connection with the divine without other people muddying it. At the same time, you need to protect other people. Oftentimes, we've seen this happen on a number of occasions where somebody goes and explains how to do a particular ritual to someone who's not in the order, and that person doesn't understand the magnitude of those energies or hasn't been initiated into those energies. And they come to find that those energies are very real, but they do not know how to properly incorporate them into their lives energetically, or to how to handle those energies. So in terms of your promise of secrecy, one of the most important things to understand is, you know what, you can go home to your husband or your wife or your best friend who might be interested in magic, and you can tell them what you did. You can say, yeah, you know what, we did an Isis invocation at the temple. What you cannot do is tell them how to perform the technique. So that goes outside of your vows. Also, you cannot tell them who is and who isn't in the order, because you need to respect people's privacy. If you're hanging out with someone in the order and you're with one of your mundane friends or family and they decide to tell those people, that's absolutely fine, but it's not your responsibility, nor should you tell them if somebody is or is not in the order. Okay? So moving on, it says, I will undertake to maintain a kindly and benevolent relationship with all frauders and sorors of this order. I will treat all members as if they were a brother or sister, as if we shared the same mother, the same father. So I think that this is pretty self-explanatory, but just a little bit of detail about it. When you become initiated into this order, we consider you family. You are family. Our family will never replace, in the mundane world, the family that you were born into that has your own significance in terms of your path. However, your spiritual family is the family that will be there for you during times that you will never be able to explain to people who don't live a magical lifestyle. When you are a magician, you lead a unique life. It's a life that nobody else can truly understand. If you go to someone at work and you start talking to them about invoking angels and all this kind of stuff, they're probably going to think you're a little crazy. But your spiritual family is going to understand exactly what what you're talking about, and the depth and magnitude of the meaning of the experiences that you're having. So it's important that we respect each other in this order as brothers and sisters and as family, because we're all striving to be one with the divine. And even if we're at different levels of alchemy and some of us are going through rough times, we should never use that as an excuse to not treat each other with the love and respect deserving of the spirit within us. So I invite you, and at any point in your time in this order, if you ever come across a challenging experience, to take a step back and to think to yourself, how can I respect and love the divine aspect within this person? And how can I be there to help them? That being said, remember also what the Hierophant says in the Neophyte initiation about mercy and severity. We have to have a true balance there. So we don't ever want to let somebody just get away with murder. But if somebody is acting in a way that is out of accordance with their divine light, we may, as a brother or sister, want to take the time to sit and talk with them from a position of love and see if we can help them heal and give them the support to heal. Okay, moving on. I solemnly promise not to suffer myself to be placed, nor place myself in a state of passivity, either through mesmerism, drugs, alcohol, or any other method of deep induction. I will maintain control of my mind at all times, lest others influence me or manipulate me into purposes of serving their own greed or lust. This is part of the vows that I and other adepts often get a lot of questions on, especially in our very liberal-minded culture when it comes to the use of substances. And what I mean by liberal is not in a political sense. I mean that if you compare our time now with, the 1920s, for example, we have situations where the states of Colorado, California, Washington, for example, have legalized recreational marijuana. That is something that would have been completely unheard of at certain periods of our history. So we have many students and people who come to the order who engage in partaking of substances, whether that be alcohol or other what we would call drugs or substances. And sometimes people want to know, okay, well, does this mean I can't do that anymore? So, what I'm going to say to you is that number one, we are not a cult, and we cannot tell you what you can or cannot do in your life. Again, you have free will and you have a choice. What I will tell you are the impact and the consequences that the use of certain substances can have in your life. What I would guide you to consider is in partaking in anything in life, whether that be substances or anything else, that you think about the effect it's going to have on your life, and you engage in it if you choose to in moderation. Okay, so that's important because number one, when we become a magician and when we become an initiate, then the Hierophant consecrates us as an initiate of the Golden Dawn path. We now become empowered in our life. We have literally said in our vows that we want to put the past behind us. We want to move on from being controlled by our lesser self and our animal functions. And we want to take control of our life through the power of the divine to transition and become spiritual beings and become empowered magicians in our life. So, engaging in all activities in moderation is very important because if we allow any habits to have control over us, then what are we saying? Essentially, we're saying to ourselves, I'm not really an empowered magician because I let other things control me rather than myself being the one in control of the situation. So I'll have you refer back to the Magician card in the Tarot deck. You'll notice in the Rider-Waite deck and in many of the other decks, the common symbolism is the Magician standing there over an altar with symbols of the four elements on it, and usually a caduceus somewhere. What this card represents is the person who is in control of all of the elements around them, and that's your purpose here in the outer order is to perfect what we call your personal pentagram. Now, as a neophyte, you haven't stepped quite onto the tree of life in terms of the energies that have been invoked within you. You'll start in the Grade of Zelator to start working through your elemental alchemy. So in the Great Zealoter, you'll work in earth, in Theorkis, you'll work in air, in Practice-Kis, you'll work in water, in Philosophus, you'll work with fire, and in Portal, you'll work with spirit. And during all of these different grades, what you'll do is you'll begin to work with each of the elements and what they represent within your sphere sensation, and you'll learn what they mean to you, and you'll learn how to integrate them in a balanced manner into your lifestyle so that you, once you place spirit above that, now become a whole new element called the quintessence, and one who is a master over the elements. And I'd rather use the word master rather than control because control has some negative connotations, I think, but is your purpose to achieve mastery over yourself and the elements. So I would ask you, if you allow drugs or alcohol or sex or other things in your life to have control over you, then are you really being the master? So that being said, you have the choice in what you want to engage in your life. You also have a choice in terms of what relationship you have with whatever that particular activity can be. And let's be real. One can be addicted to many things: video games, substances, negative relationships. There's tons of things we can be addicted to. So I challenge you throughout your time here in the Golden Dawn to look in your life and see what things have control over you and to what degree they do, and for you to become the master of those things. Okay. Another aspect of this particular part of the vow is we want to think about our vow of secrecy and devotion, So one of the things we don't want to do is get so drunk, for example, that we're spilling our guts to random stranger or some friend about what it is we're doing in the order. That absolutely would break our oath. We don't want to, as mentioned before, give information to somebody that would make things unsafe for them or for you. Okay? So I'm going to move on now a little bit more to the end. And we talk a little bit about upholding the virtues of the infinite pillars, not debasing your magical knowledge in the labor of evil magic, um, and also to uphold the decisions of the chiefs of the second order, not encouraging schism. And then within the Neophyte initiation, it discusses here that if we should break our magical oath, a heavy penalty may be exacted upon us from higher forces. It says, I swear to observe all I have said under penalty of being expelled from this order, and furthermore submitting myself to a deadly stream of power set in action by the divine guardians of this order, who, living in the light of their perfect justice, can strike the breaker of their magical oath with death, palsy, or misfortune. This is by far the most controversial part of our vows. And it's important to understand why it exists. And it's important to understand what the real impact of this means. Pardon me. First of all, you will recall that at the beginning of this discussion on the vows, that I told you that your vows are not between you in order per se. They're between you and your higher genius. And they're between you and the Lord of the universe. And it says here that the divine guardians of the order would be the ones to exact this justice. Okay? It would not be them who would make the decision. It would be the decision of your higher genius. It's important to understand that, because if you study the vows, and we've literally just kind of touched on the spiritual significance of them, the vows cover the Asiatic plane, but also that's the physical plane, the repercussions here in the physical plane, but it also covers higher spiritual concepts, right? So, for example, the discussion we just had about, substance abuse or addictive behaviors, right? How they interplay with the vows. There's the physical aspect of it, which is that if you abuse substances and you have an addictive personality, well, that could cause your life to fall apart and for you to lose very important things like your family, your friends, or your job. But there's also the spiritual aspect of the vows, which says if you allow something to have control over you, are you really an empowered magician? It's the same thing here with this particular aspect of the vows. When you make these vows and you make a promise to your higher genius, there's no more important promise that you can ever make. Sometimes you hear, people say, well, I swear on my dead mother, or something that's supposed to be, important to them. Like there's something that's so important that by swearing on this, you'll see how serious I am. Okay. None of that is as important as what you swear on your higher genius. And what you are swearing in these vows is that you are going to set aside those lesser inclinations in your life for the higher. Now, saying that, that doesn't mean that, okay, well, I made a promise that I'm going to better my life and I'm going to better my finances. And I'm going to go back to school and, oh, I didn't do it. Now I have palsy. That's not really what happens. I'm not saying that something like that couldn't happen, though, however, if you made a very serious promise to your higher genius in a deep magical practice where your higher genius was telling you, you know, if you don't stop doing this, then it's going to result in X, Y, and Z. And you understand that there's a huge spiritual impact on your life. And you say, yes, yes, Lord, I promise you that I will stop doing this. And then you turn around and you go ahead and do it. What I'm saying is that when it comes to your vows, you have to understand that your work with your higher genius is the most serious work that you will ever engage in your entire life. And that this is put in here to impress the seriousness of that upon you. Have I ever seen somebody suffer from death or palsy, you know, from breaking a vow or something in the 15 years that I've been in this order? No. I have seen people undergo misfortune. I will say that, and that can come in a variety of different ways. What I'm saying, though, is that there will be no adept or no person in this order that will ever take revenge on you or that will ever say, oh, you broke your oath. And so now these things are going to happen to you, because it's not between you and us. It's between you and your higher genius. And your higher genius will implement punishments if necessary based on what is needed to help you grow spiritually. So I say that because you have to understand that it's not about revenge being taken on you. This part of the vow is about you understanding how serious your vow is. And it's about understanding that your higher genius is there to guide you out of light and love, and sometimes may impress certain things upon you in order to help you grow. Those things we have no control over. The adepts of the inner order, your mentors, or other people in this order have no control over what your higher genius, which is your higher self, it's your higher self, it's ultimately yourself, which may implement stuff if you decide to make a serious promise to yourself and you break that oath. Okay? So what I don't want to do here is scare you. I know that this part of the oath can be scary, but the truth is that it really just has to do with lessons that may be placed in your path to help you learn. And if you don't engage in those lessons seriously, then just like a child, you know, who disobeys their parent, then from time to time you may experience the impact of that. But that doesn't mean that it has to be something that's negative. Truly, it can be something that's positive. When I had a conversation with a student just the other day, and we were talking about the challenges of alchemy, and that's exactly how I worded it, the challenges of alchemy. And he said, well, why does everything have to be negative? And I said, well, why does a challenge have to be negative? Why isn't it positive? In fact, it is positive, because at the end of that challenge, once you overcome that challenge, the outcome is positive, right? You are a better person than you were before that challenge. Now, that being said, I just would like to offer, I want to end this on a positive note, because I feel like that part of the oath is a little bit charged. So I want to end this on a positive note and give you a little bit of my own personal story. I joined the order when I was about 23 years old. I came from a background in a family that there was a lot of violence, both physical and sexual. I suffered from a terrible eating disorder, substance abuse, both drugs and alcohol. And honestly, when I look back on my life at that point, I wonder to myself how I was even alive, because I pretty much was just a dead shell of a person, really only doing the things in life that I thought I needed to do to kind of just get me through. I just kind of just had this belief that if I went to work and if I went to college, eventually things would pan out. But I had always had inclinations towards mystical and spiritual work in my life ever since I was a little girl. When I went to college, I met someone and we had a discussion about magic, and they introduced me to the Golden Dawn, to this particular order. And when I was initiated into Neophyte and I got my manual, this is my old Neophyte manual, actually, the original, um, I ate it up. And I began performing the LBRP and the BRH, and just immediately I began to experience these changes in my life. I had studied magic before and performed magic before, but it was a different experience. And I sit here before you today, not only an adept of the order, but an imperatrix of the Temple of those Hermes, which I think is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most wonderful achievements, because it is the highest degree of servitude I've been able to achieve. And through my servitude, I've seen so many people grow. And I know that it was not my work, but the work of the divine light through me. I've also I've achieved my doctorate in biomedical engineering. None of these things I would have achieved without the work of the Golden Dawn. The family that we have here has always been so supportive of me. No matter what I've gone through in my life, um, I've always been able to turn to my brothers and sisters in the order, and they've given me the support that I've needed, and I have the deepest gratitude towards them. And even though some of the alchemy that I've been through in my life, which forced me to really look at who I was as an individual and the activities I was engaging in my life, even though that was very difficult, having the tools available to me in this system brought so much change and transformation. And it's why I sit here before you today, because I love this work. I love this order. There has been nothing which has brought me more satisfaction in my life than being a part of this order. And I love everyone here, and I love to have the opportunity to share my experience with you. So I hope that you as new neophytes or even older members who are reviewing this video, I hope that each and every one of you find the joy and the light and the love that comes with the magical practices in the order, and that you understand that each practice is meant to invoke that light and love into your life, into your spirit sensation, and to help you to ascend and transform to become the most potent version of yourself, so that you can achieve all that you've hoped for in your life and more. So I look forward to doing more of these videos and to working more closely with each and every one of you. Please feel free, if you have any questions, to ask them on our Facebook forum, the General Order Forum. If you need to, you may always contact me privately. Please PM me. I will not leave my personal information on this video, but as all of you know, it's not that difficult to get a hold of me, but I invite you to if needed. Love, light, and peace to you. Again, thank you for watching this video. And if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me or any other adept in the order. 770.